I went to Marvel. I didn't know anything about making movies. I didn't know anything about publishing comic books. It was an advantage because when I came in, I could see some of the craziness that went on in those industries. And so after 6 months on the job, and I was still learning, I had a mental image of a wagon wheel that I carried around in my head every day, Lee. The hub was the intellectual property that we had, that we could monetize. And we had 4,700 characters. And the spokes on the wheel were how we monetized the IP. And the hub of the wheel is the synergy between all of those spokes.
You actually started your career in the U.S. Navy. You were a lieutenant on a guided missile destroyer serving 2 terms in Vietnam. That must have been an incredible experience. What are your sort of biggest takeaways from that you've used to help you in your career?
Well, I do think the first part of my life where I started to learn very valuable lessons about leadership was in the U.S. Navy. A little bit of detail. I was actually, I didn't go to Annapolis, but I'd gotten a degree in ceramic engineering from Alfred in upstate New York. Got a very good education there. I worked for a year in a fiberglass factory. Actually, glass is a ceramic. Most people don't think of glass as a ceramic, but it's in fact the biggest ceramic industry in the world. But after a year, I recognized I didn't want to be an engineer. No problem with engineers, but I was not good at sitting at a desk. And so I was looking for adventure. My father had been in the U.S. Navy as an officer in World War II in the South Pacific and in the Korean War. And I decided I want to go in the Navy just for the adventure. It was my uncle was also in the Navy, so it was in the family. And I applied to officer candidate school, which during wartime, all the arms of the military need more officers than they do in peacetime. So they create these quickie, if you will, educational opportunities for people to become officers. And I was at Newport, Rhode Island for 4 months at Navy's officer candidate school. And if you were in the top 10% of the class, you got to kind of pick your assignment. And I was lucky enough to be in that situation. So I picked destroyers in the Pacific. I'd watched a lot of John Wayne movies growing up. I'm serious. I was very naive in many ways. But, and so I was assigned to the USS Joseph Strauss, which is a guided missile destroyer, DDG-16, home ported in Pearl Harbor. But at that particular time I was graduating, had just gone into the war zone in the Vietnam War. So I traveled by Navy planes all the way out to a carrier off of North Vietnam, and then the carrier dropped me on the stern of the ship via helicopter, and I was in the real world. And I learned so many valuable lessons from the officers, particularly the captains of my ship, on leadership, particularly leadership in obviously very difficult extremist situations. And I learned a few things not to do as well from some of the weaker ones. But I have to say, my experience, there were very few weak Navy officers, and there were a lot of strong senior enlisted men, the Navy chiefs. And I learned a lot from them too, because I was basically I knew very little. The people who were on the ship that went to Annapolis studied for 4 years. I studied for 4 months. I had a lot of catching up to do, which I understood.
Well, I thought your title was, it struck me, damage control and communications officer. So it's like, well, that makes sense. Like, this is really bad. I need to communicate really well around what happened and what we're going to do about it. Why did they combine those two? That's it. Super interesting.
Well, actually, no, they weren't combined. So my first deployment, I was damage control officer. And then after 7 months in the war zone, the ship went back to Pearl Harbor, and then you did training and fixed the ship up where it needed to be and so on, and then went back for another 6 or 7 months. But on that second deployment, I was promoted to communications officer. There were two different jobs, and yeah, and but I was also again talking about leadership here and learning different experiences. I was a qualified air intercept controller. The Navy sent me to in between deployments to a school in San Diego, and the Navy likes to have forward air controllers for its planes for a lot of obvious reasons. But in that particular case, aircraft carriers never want to be near land. They'd be 100 miles from North Vietnam. But so they need someone to talk to the pilots that are a couple of miles off of North Vietnam. And so we had, I think it was 5 different people, including myself, qualified to do that, to send our jets against the MiGs, the enemy north. I was also a fleet officer of the deck. Again, for those in your audience are not familiar, I wouldn't expect them to be, but the Navy, the captain doesn't drive the ships anymore. That went out with the age of sail. The captains are very busy with lots of things they have to do, particularly in the combat zone. So you have a highly qualified officer called the officer of the deck that is qualified to drive the ship, and that requires a lot of practice and what have you before you get qualified. And I was qualified fleet, meaning I could also drive the ship in the company of other ships. And so that was for a young guy, I had a tremendous amount of responsibility because there's 300 sailors, 20 officers on the ship. Ship weighed 20,000 metric tons. The guns shot 11 miles. So you could shoot inland at targets up to 11 miles inland. We had a missile, one of the early Navy missiles on the ship, anti-aircraft missile with a range of 20 miles. We had nuclear tipped depth charges. So a lot going on for a 24-year-old. And I was very blessed, though. And I truly loved my time in the Navy. And when I was about to get out after 3.5 years, the Navy was nice enough to offer me a regular commission like the people from Annapolis have. You're always good at things you love, right? And I love the Navy. But I had recently gotten married, and my wife had been talking to some of the wives on the ship, and I was what's called a surface warfare officer. And I was going to, if I made it a career, I was going to be at sea for 6 months at a time. And my wife did not want to raise the kids alone for 6 months every year. And I loved her. I loved the Navy, but I loved her a little bit more. And we are now married next month, it'll be 55 years. So I think, so I got out of the Navy, but I could talk for hours about my experience and incidences that happened where I really learned a lot from watching other people and living it.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing adventure. I'm curious, what is it that you love about turnarounds? And in my work, I have a consulting business. I've actually started 8 companies from scratch. I love being on the front lines, and I love cleaning up. You can call them turnarounds, but hot messes. Sometimes I call it the biggest cleanup on aisle 5 I've ever had to get into because it's kind of a disaster everywhere. I love it. I know why I love it. Why did you gravitate towards it, and why do you like that work?
Well, I didn't know the first turnaround that I did, I was thrown into it. I didn't choose to do it. My boss, though, had a lot of faith in me, and the international division of this particular business was not doing well. And he suddenly out of the blue said, "We're flying to London from New York tomorrow, and you're going to take over." And I had no idea that I had any skills or actually interest in turnarounds. But I have to say now, looking back, while I was frankly depressed for the first 6 months, what am I doing in this job? What do I have? But then we started getting results, and we did very well. And then I started thinking, I not only do I like this, but I do have some skills that I didn't know about. And so then the company I was working for at the time, Bristol Myers, said, "Oh, we have this other division. It's a bigger problem," and gave me that one to do. And we also had tremendous results. And I'm addicted. I know this now, but I'm really addicted to success and fixing things when you work with a diversified team, a lot of people with a lot of different skills. I've had a lot of success, and the media, when they interview me, often wants to give me, more success than or credit than I deserve, because they're inherited or found really good people that ended up making me look good. At Marvel, for example, I went to Marvel. I didn't know anything about making movies. I didn't know anything about publishing comic books. And while I had to make obviously some changes and what have you, and the culture of the company needed to change, there were a number of very good people there already in those areas. And I take credit not for starting the movies. The first movie was being filmed when I showed up as CEO or whatever, but I'll actually take credit for staying out of their way. I knew what I didn't know. And I wasn't arrogant enough to think that I could suddenly parachute in and start making comments on scripts or going to to the sets and changing. No, of course not. It was being ridiculous. Okay. And so we had a lot of good people. We added more. And I just chose to stay out of their way. And certain policy issues I had to get involved in. Yes. But the day to day hard work, writing a comic book, illustrating a comic book, you know, editing the stories, I didn't get involved in that. Only the big picture issues.
Well, I think, Peter, you're the superpower that I'm getting out of it that I think you have is that here's Marvel with all these things they can leverage, the people, the IP, all of it. And the previous leadership wasn't organizing all of that stuff in a way that we could go forward and create more and more value. You were able to come in and actually leverage what they had in a really successful way and then go to the exit. So that's a really big deal. And I run into a lot of companies. I look at what they have. I was like, this is incredible. Why haven't you been leveraging what you have? Why haven't you been doing less better and get this right?
No, I really think it was, I've said this, it was an advantage to not know anything about making movies or comic books. Because when I came in, I could see that some of the craziness that went on in those industries and still does, less so today, but craziness that we did not want to participate in. And so after 6 months on the job, and I was still learning, I had a mental image of a wagon wheel that I carried around in my head every day, Lee. And the wagon wheel was the hub, was the intellectual property that we had, that we could monetize. And we had 4,700 characters. Now, the A list, right? We all know the A list was maybe 10 and the B list, another 10. That's all we really needed anyway. And the spokes on the wheel were how we monetized the IP. And the hub of the wheel is the synergy between all of those spokes. So when I got there, we had a very shaky wheel. We had one good spoke, which was comic books. We had a half fractured spoke for licensing, and that was it. So we had a very shaky wheel coming out of bankruptcy. And after 3 months, I did do a deal with a company called Activision for video games for some of our A-list characters. That went well. So that added another full spoke, but we're still shaky. It's two and a half spokes. The real big change came just about a year after I came. Our first movie came out, which was X-Men 1. And it was a big hit. And people were lined up around the block. I would say that 95% of the people seeing the movie had no idea that X-Men was the number one comic book in the world. Didn't even know it was based on comic book characters. But the people doing the creative had done a great job. And so, and that was Fox and our own people mixed, working as a team. And so that added a movie spoke because now we were going to make a whole bunch of movies. And that also fixed the licensing spoke, because there's a huge amount of licensing that goes along with the successful movies. Many, many different categories. The biggest was toys. Eventually, toy licensing became its own spoke. And when we sold to Disney, we had about 15 spokes on the wheel. But the synergy on the rim I was talking about, you go to the movie, you might buy the toys for your kids. You might play the video game. You know, you might buy the Halloween costume, Spider-Man, for your kids and take them to see Spider-Man. All of these things played out together. That was the synergy of the rim of the wheel. And so I could look at it strategically, I think, and see, okay, what makes sense for us to do. And we adapted licensing as our primary focus, believe it or not. And the reason was, it's a sweet business when you're good at it, because you have the only expenses you have is you probably have some people on your staff, usually lawyers. So you have their expense, but that's it. All the revenue that you make from licensing goes right to the bottom line. So if we wanted to improve our cash flows, we put a big emphasis on cash flows, because that's the lifeblood. It's the blood coursing through the veins of any business. You have to have positive cash flows. So, and licensing was part of that turnaround, because it's really, from a cash standpoint, if you're good, it's a gold mine.
Yeah, cash flow is the arguably most important number for every business. It's the one number you can't game, really at all. So you have a book coming out. It'll be, I believe, February 3rd of next year, the 28 Essentials for Superhero Leadership. And I've gone through all of those. Obviously, we don't have time today to get into all of them, but some of them really stood out. So your example right here of coming in, looking at what we have to leverage and doing that and building on it, perfect example. And then one of the essentials that stuck out, don't assume you know everything. And I think that's why so many successful entrepreneurs that start a business fail in their second one, because they think they know everything. And that's why a lot of investors won't bet on a horse to do it twice, if you will. And I think about all the things I've done, and early as I did the second one and the third one, I kind of know all this stuff. This is just going to work. No, I go back to the adventure of building the first one. For me, was a aerospace business that I sold well into 9 figures in 2016. It was a 23-year journey, and that was ridiculously hard, but also fun. And every new venture, now my mindset is, we don't know. We're going to have to figure this out, and it's going to be really hard, but it's the same kind of brand new adventure, almost like being on another planet. Yes, the lessons help from the other things that I've done, but it's different people, different customers, different markets.
Exactly.
That's so brilliant what you came up with there. Talk more about that. Don't assume you know everything.
Yeah, well, that is one of my leadership essentials, which basically says, don't assume you've seen it all before. And part of that is get help when you need it. Weak leaders, and I've run into some, come into a business and they think it's a sign of weakness for them to ask for help, which to me is kind of insane. But you go into, and most of my businesses that I did were new businesses for me, not just Marvel, that I did turnarounds in. And so, you've got to educate yourself, and you've got to get help to do that sometimes. People that are expert in areas that you are not, even though you need to be eventually. And so I always try to get help where we need it. And I think that's particularly true today. There's so much change in the world. And if you don't understand AI, get help. And that's okay. AI is not easy to understand. And particularly how it might apply to, say, a business you're involved in, or even if you have leadership in a nonprofit organization, AI could help. But you need to understand it. And to do that, you need help. And there's a whole bunch of things as the world changes. And I never saw it as a sign of weakness to ask for help. I'd go to people my first week on the job and say, please explain this to me. I wasn't going to kid them. I didn't know. And frankly, I was, human nature is such that when you do it, the people you're talking to, rather than thinking you're weak somehow, actually appreciate it. Appreciate the fact that you value them, that they have something that you value, their knowledge, their judgment, whatever. And when you're going into a new situation as a CEO or any leadership situation, you need to build trust as soon as possible. Trust doesn't get talked about too much when we talk about particularly turnarounds, but at startups, there's a lot of parallels with startups and turnarounds, not completely, but a lot. And you need to build trust with the people that are there. And they're watching you very closely. Don't kid yourself. Don't be naive. They're watching your body language. They're watching whether you're up or down on a particular day. And you'll have to deliver on the things that you say, the things that you believe in, that you tell people. If you're going to change the culture, the value system of the organization, which I had to in every turnaround, by the way. The culture was bankrupt. And you can't just stand in front of a group of people and say, okay, our new culture is boom, 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 and boom. You can say that. That's fine. It's a start. But if you don't behave as the leader in ways that support that culture, you not only do you not build trust, you've lost the organization. And I've seen that happen too. I've seen a lot of people talk and then when the chips are down, not deliver because it's hard on something that they were espousing. So, I think that's again one of the things that really separates a poor leader from a very good leader.
Culture is interesting to me. It's incredibly important. Leadership development, how leaders show up, and all of that, wildly important. But I feel like after working with hundreds of companies, they get it wrong, and they often will start there. This is just my take. Bear with me for half a minute. They start there. Let's get culture right. Let's get leadership development right. But their business model makes no sense. It's completely broken. The team isn't aligned to getting results. So I think the first thing we have to do is align everybody to the value we're creating as an organization. And then culture and leadership to me is how we make the numbers and go through all of it. So we start building it based on where we're having issues. And now culture matters. They can see why it matters, and it comes in slowly and appropriately that way, but powerfully. And I agree with you that, we as top leaders, our behaviors, our actions, our decisions, consistency, all of that is what drives that, the trust. But let's get everybody aligned to a business model and the value that we're creating for all stakeholders. That we have to get that right first, or culture and leadership almost doesn't matter. It's almost like we're focused on business virtue signaling in a way. So this is how I view it. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, totally. I think you're right on the money. I define culture in two ways. The first is simply how we treat each other and how we treat other people, that we depend on for success in our lives, whether it's professional or whether it's business or non-business, doesn't matter. They're always people we depend on outside our organization. So in my case, it might have been consultants. It might have been auditors. It might have been, we can go down the list, bankers. It could be, depend on your customers. How do you treat your customers? I've actually come into businesses that didn't appreciate or respect customers. I know that's hard to believe, right? But it was like, oh, we can sell anything to these people. That was the attitude. We could not, don't do it. We could sell them anything. And so I give one or two, I give you one or two. Oh, the other side of culture is also what do we need to be good at to be successful in our business? We always want to be good at everything. I understand that, but no one could possibly be good, get an A at everything. Okay, it's not. What are the key things that we do need to get an A? Is it customer service? Is it advertising? Is it new product creation? Is it, we can go to, it's different with different businesses, but you have to put your thumb on those key things right away. Okay. And the culture has to change if those areas are not valued. And most often I'd find they weren't. New products is a good example because I've done a lot of turnarounds in consumer products. And, I came into one company where new products were not considered important. They were actually very important for this particular industry. You needed new products every year to impress not just the customers, but your consumers, your ultimate consumers. You were selling to retailers. Okay. And you talk about building a brand for an overall company. It comes through your products. And so, but the organization didn't, and the good people in the organization didn't want to be in new products because historically leadership when new products didn't work out, and they didn't a lot of times because there wasn't an emphasis on them, people got fired. So the best people in the organization didn't want to touch new products. And I'm the new guy saying new products is our number one priority. So how do you have to make the value system over time. One of the things that was a problem was the new product ideas came almost completely from the U.S. organization. This was a multinational company. And so any new ideas from outside the U.S. weren't taken seriously. And of course, I came in and I was listening to everyone, and I thought, wow, the people in England have this great idea for a product we could sell out around the world. And so I created a committee, new products, 20 people from around the world, and with me as the chairman. And the first time I said, we're going to go ahead with this new idea that they have in the UK, the US people were in shock. But I had said, new products matter, and we're going to take good ideas any place we can get them. And then, of course, we started having successes in new products. And then all of a sudden, the new people wanted to be in the good people wanted to be in new products. And I used other events to continue to support that. For example, the first new product we had that was really successful. I was giving a speech in front of about, I think it was 200 of our employees, a town hall meeting, so-called. And I basically, suddenly called up 7 people out of the audience. This happened to be the team that was on this new product, all the different functional areas, one from finance, one from marketing, one from manufacturing, etc. And congratulated them on their success and gave them checks. Now, the checks were not big. They were like $200, okay? But what really mattered was them seeing themselves touted in front of their peers as having done a great job. I could have given them $1 million. It wouldn't have mattered as much as being publicly called out for great work. And of course, there were always people in the audience probably thinking, oh, Cuneo should have given me a check because I did a great job on something else. Yes, you always have those people. But I didn't care because I wasn't not going to give them checks because I was worried about other people.
That's such a great example of changing the culture into an innovative, new product, new ideas, because that's how we're going to grow into the future culture, as opposed to let's just do what we do and let's shy away from it. And for example, in the aerospace business, I mentioned we had about 40 to 50 engineers at any point in time. And they were the keepers of future growth in gross margin and profitability of the business, because every year, all the new products, you developed it now, but we know in 6 months, 18 months, 36 months, this is going to be the growth going forward. And we talked about it that way, and everybody was compensated that way.
Mm-hmm.
entire organization. And if somebody wanted to make more, well, here's a path you can go to go in that particular direction. But I do think it's important, for us as leaders to say, because I've heard you say in other podcasts, I have no vision. I just latch on to what other people do. Well, you have to have a vision for, and I believe you do, for the potential of a business and where it could go. But I think it's so important for us to say, this is where we're going. This is how we're going to get here, engaging everybody in productive ways of doing it. And then that third really important piece, here's what's in it for you to go on this journey with all of us in that direction. And did you ever meet Jack Welch by chance from GE?
I met Jack only once for a brief time. He was headquartered here in Connecticut. Back then, GE was here. And I did, through a contact, did spend a little bit of time with him, but that was all. I can't say that we were friends or anything like that.
He was actually my business partner for a while in ETW before he passed. He became a really good friend, and he was always so adamant around where are we going, how are we going to get there, and what's in it for everybody to get there. And it sounds so simple, but very few companies get that right. What's your experience?
Well, I don't know. It's very interesting because I think the companies that we think of as very successful do get it right. But, every company has a life cycle, and businesses change, industries change, social mores change, and you have to continue to be looking for changes you might have to make, in culture to keep up or to adapt. So you can have a great run for 5 years, and then all of a sudden you're not anymore. And you can kind of never fall asleep. Now, I typically, my average time on a turnaround was about 3 years. And then I knew if I got run over, as I say, by a truck, the organization would do just fine without me. They got the right people with the right culture, with having success and what have you. And so I think, but I think, you've done a lot of startups, and I mentioned that I think there's a lot of parallels, not completely, but a couple of things. One, people who are working and happy in those situations are not risk averse. They're people willing to take risks, although there's a great degree of uncertainty in the organization. Will we be successful? Will we get the turnaround done? Will the startup really work? All of these things. So you need people. It's not for everybody. You need people who can cope emotionally with the uncertainty and maybe with the stress that comes with it. And you also have to be able to change. My experience, I have worked on a couple of startups, not like you, Lee, but I will say that the thing I've noticed is in most successful startups, the founders found out that their original idea wasn't going to work, and they had to pivot. And the ones that were unsuccessful just couldn't pivot. They were still hanging on to their original idea. And many successful turnarounds that I do know of pivoted multiple times. But the leadership was okay with that and comfortable changing the rules to a certain degree sometimes, and could live with that. And their egos could say, okay, my idea, I blew it. It wasn't right, and here's why not. But here's what we can do. We can morph ourselves into something great.
Yeah, that is really powerful advice, and many can't do it. And I think a lot of the startup CEOs are in it for the wrong reasons as well. Make a bunch of money, be popular, famous, whatever it is. But the ones that are truly interested in creating value, as soon as they see a better way, they'll pivot on a dime. And that's kind of where my head is at. I can be really strong going this direction, and one of my team members says, but this would create a lot more value. Awesome. Let's go that way. Let's go right now. I got that other thing wrong. And I think a lot can't do that. I also think having too much money can be a problem, because having too much money, you don't make the smartest decisions.
That's it. It's an interesting point, actually. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that could be. I hear you. Um, I just think that, you know, working in an organization that's fraught with uncertainty is just not for everybody. And, you know, if sometimes people ask me, well, give us an example of a mistake you made or mistakes you've made. You're not perfect. No one is. That's true. And, I'm certainly not perfect. And, one of the things I do talk about is that occasionally I would hire people that I had a lot of concerns about whether they were emotionally equipped to change from what their former situation, which was, say, a big company, um, doing fine, um, not taking in much in the way of risks or what have you. But these people were successful in that role, in that kind of environment. And then putting them in the environment of, oh my God, every day there's going to be a new problem. Practically, we're going to have to think completely out of the box most of the time, what have you. And I hired them, even though my instincts told me it could be a problem, because I just liked them. Unfortunately, we had great interviews. Other people liked them. So I thought, okay, well, let's take the shot. And invariably, guess what? It didn't work out. So that part is hard, but you really have to, in the situation where there's a lot of uncertainty, startups, turnarounds, you have to make sure the people you're bringing in are equipped. They may think they are, by the way. They think these people all did. They thought they could do it.
It's super interesting, that whole thing. So, what is job security? So, people have asked me, or have actually said, I would never work for myself because I want job security. And I thought about this is decades ago. It's like, I feel more secure working for myself because if I create the value, I'm always going to have income and grow something. The work somebody else thinks completely out of my control could wipe the whole thing out. Even a big company, they wipe out divisions, they shut down regions, whatever that is. So what really is job security? And just thinking about that in the the different environments, startup for sure is super exciting, and I 100% agree. It's really not for everyone. And one of your leadership essentials of the 28 essentials, is around leaders knowing when it's time to step aside. And what's your advice there? And is it the top leader? Is it a leader at any level in the organization? What's your advice?
Well, I think we all have a journey through life, and we all develop in certain ways. And with turnarounds, so at Marvel, for example, after 3 years, I said to the board, I was on the board, and I said, it's time for me to go. We were really doing well. And they asked me to stay for one more year because they wanted to groom a replacement. There really wasn't one to replace me right away. So, of course, I did close to 4 years with Marvel. But typically, if I look back, I was out of these companies, and they were all doing well, probably after about 3 years, because I was addicted and I needed to move on to something else. I've also, when people call me about going in to lead a company that's doing well, I'm very honest with them. I tell them I will screw it up because I'll be making changes. I'll be doing whatever. I'm someone that needs to make change on a regular basis. That's where I get my kicks. As I said, I'm addicted, and these are on paper great jobs, but people were surprised when I'd say no because I knew that I wouldn't. Every leader has their situation where they can really show what they can do, and there's other situations they're not good. We see it in a lot of places. We see it in the military. A lot of our historical heroes in the military, made their marks in certain situations, but weren't very good in others. I was talking, recently. I love history, particularly military history. I'm on the board of the National Archives Foundation, in Washington. I've been on the board for now it's 15 years. And I love it because I learn a lot about American history that I might not have known. And you learn a lot about leaders. And all leaders, even the best, are flawed. They have some flaws because we're human. And George Patton, for example, General George Patton in World War II, your audience may not be familiar with Patton, but he's one of our great Army generals. Very aggressive, very aggressive. Didn't always follow orders, but he turned out to be right 90% of the time, and so on. And so when the right situation occurred, he was absolutely the number one general that our leadership in the United States wanted to call on. Other situations, he was bored, unhappy, and would do silly stuff. But on balance, we owe General Patton a heck of a lot. I often talk about Winston Churchill. There couldn't have been a more perfect person to lead the United Kingdom through World War II. He had the right mentality. He was a fighter, and so on. Yet, as soon as the war was over, he was thrown out of the government. He was not a particularly popular or effective guy in peacetime. But if your leaders are not familiar with, your listeners are not familiar with Churchill, I would just tell them to go online and pull up Churchill's "We Will Fight Them on the Beaches" speech. It's 12 minutes long. And basically, it occurred after the Nazis had conquered all of Europe. They were now, they were across the English Channel from England, and they sent emissaries to sue for a peace treaty with England. And Churchill and many of Churchill's supporters in the government, not the king, interestingly, but others, wanted to do a peace treaty. And Churchill really didn't want to. He wanted to fight. And he didn't want to give in. And there's a scene in the movie, and I don't know if this actually happened. It's called The Finest Hour. And the winner of the Academy Award that year, this is probably 10 years ago now, was Gary Oldman for leading actor playing Winston Churchill. And there's a scene in which Churchill is trying to make this decision. Do we fight or do we sign a peace treaty? And he decides, he's driving down the street in his limousine. He suddenly tells his driver, pull over. Churchill gets out. People on the street are going, what? Churchill's here. He goes down into the underground, which is a subway in London, gets on a car. It's rush hour. Car is shoulder to shoulder with all different types of people, different colors, different ages, probably different religions, everything. Okay. A very diverse thing. And he says to them, should we sue for peace or fight? And everyone in the car says, what? Of course we're going to fight. And I don't know if this actually happened, but it's one of the great scenes in movie. I made a lot of movies, and it's a great scene. And so he goes up and he decides we're going to fight. And he's very unpopular for that decision with a lot of people at first. Then he goes on to give a speech to all of the United Kingdom. So with that, at this point, it includes, a lot of other places, Canada, Australia, India, go down the list, are all part of Ireland, Scotland, etc. Gives a speech to all of the people in those areas. His 12-minute, we are going to fight them on the beaches speech. And when I first heard it, my hair was standing up. I mean, I couldn't speak. With one great speech, he convinced an entire kingdom to follow him and fight the Nazis. I really think it's just 12 minutes long. And if people really want to hear something amazing, even though it was a long time ago, we're talking about 1940. Okay. It still has the same ring to me. But yet Churchill was not particularly effective at all in in peacetime.
Yeah, that's an hour-long discussion as to what the differences are around that one as well.
Yeah.
One of the books I finished last month was The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. It's quite a project, but
Yes.
wow.
Yeah.
There's so much in there on leadership for good, leadership for evil.
Mm.
And I actually think the biggest, and I've heard you talk about this, the biggest deficit on the planet to me are having enough leaders that are both capable and moral. Capable of creating the value they were commissioned to create or they're positioned to create, and moral in all their decisions, where it's win-win and it's right and not wrong, and it's consistent. What do we do here going forward? I when I look at our elected leaders globally, it's a mess.
Yeah.
So I think capable and moral leaders, by how I'm thinking about it, need to start doing something. And so one of the things that I'm doing, as has been a little over a year now, is I'm leading communities of families raising kids to create value in the world. And what does that look like? And for these different communities, we meet once a month. We do a deep dive topic on something. One of them actually is finding your kids' value creation superpowers, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been transformational. Some of these underserved, low-income communities have gone from sort of a fearful culture, not trusting, to hopeful. And I love that change. So I'm leaning in. I think we've got 41,000 and climbing parents in our dinner table family community from over 60 countries. I want to take it to millions over the next 3 years.
Right. Right.
So I think all of us can lean in and do something. What's your advice for moral and capable leaders and how they need to step it up here? And a lot don't want to get into politics because of the ridiculousness, but so what? We need to do it anyway.
Well, I don't get into politics because people will invariably, when I talk to them, say, "How do you rate so and so? How do you see so and so as a leader? It could be a politician, it could be anybody, someone else." And what I like to say is, we have less good leadership in the world than ever. And my hope is that the young people will rise up. And I'm defining young as, in this case, age 5 to age 30. And I say that they are not learning leadership. Why not? And what can we do about it? What can they do about it? What can their parents do about it? This is a big sub-theme in what we talk about. And I think, we have a lot of challenges with young people learning leadership. I get constant complaints from CEOs and C-suite executives that I talk to about complaints about recent college grads, even from great schools, cannot perform. They can't deal with even the slightest setback. The slightest setback, they're completely thrown. They have no social skills. They don't look you in the eye when they talk to you. Their work ethic is, well, I think I'll quit today, but I won't call up and tell anyone. I mean, it's endless. I'm sure you've heard a lot of it yourself. So, so I'll tell you what some of the reasons I think that young people aren't learning leadership. First is that I believe we learn 90% of learning leadership is all about face-to-face interactions with a diversity of other human beings. Diversity in terms of their backgrounds and so on, but also geographic diversity. And that's how you generate, you learn, you form the instincts for effective leadership, the behaviors, the philosophies. That's what the 28 essentials are, actually. They're the things I think I learned in my life about leadership and what I try to practice. So it's very difficult. So because young people don't get those face-to-face experiences. It's not just of COVID. It started long before that. Okay. The biggest enemy to learning leadership is a cell phone. And we all have them. I have mine sitting here as well. but the kids don't know how to use them really for good. And they've never been educated in that way. And of course, the cell phone can be very, very, very awful. People will say things on cell phones they'd never dare say to your face. And there's a lot of misinformation. And kids today don't know to value stuff when they hear it, and they just believe whatever they hear. So I think face to face, and I have a list of on my website, petercuneo.com, 15 things I recommend for kids to learn leadership from 5 to 30. You wouldn't be surprised by a lot of them. Study abroad, team sports, performing arts. I think performing arts is a team sport. Okay. Altruistic endeavors. You wouldn't be surprised, but these all generally come down to face-to-face, situations, experiences, both personally and professionally, with this diversity of other people. And so I think there are many others, but that's the biggest failing. We do have over parenting, sometimes called gentle parenting. Well-meaning parents have decided that their children up until they go to work should never have a single negative thought about themselves. Therefore, they'll make every decision for them. Kids growing up don't make decisions for themselves. Even the simplest decision is generated for them. If they happen to have a situation, you tried out for that elite soccer team or lacrosse team, you didn't make the team. It's the coach's fault. Now, maybe it is the coach's fault. Maybe the child just wasn't good enough. But if it was the coach's fault, life happens. We say it, garbage happens. Okay. Get used to it. It won't be the last time. And you have a choice. Quit or work to get better. Go to the lower team, work to get better. My granddaughter, was very interested in lacrosse in high school. She had a similar experience. She did not make the elite team. My son and my daughter-in-law, basically just told her, okay, maybe you weren't good enough, whatever. And she decided she's going to work extra hard. And the next year she made the team. By the way, most recently, she just committed to Lafayette College, Division I lacrosse. She's become that good. So, but she had a challenge and she worked on it. I'm very proud of her, as I owe all my grandkids, because they're all doing great. But it's well-meaning parents, but you have to be able to do the tough things.
I actually think, Peter, that all the opportunity in the world is in the struggle. And these well-meaning parents that are taking all the struggle they possibly can away from their kids are not doing them any favors to get ready to be a very successful, value-creating adult in any way, shape, or form.
I agree 1,000%. One of my 28 essentials says, forget your successes, remember every detail of your failures. Because I believe, and I don't think it's just me, how my brain works. I think it's, if you're honest with yourself, you learn more from thinking about what went wrong when you blew it than just saying it's someone else's fault or I had this thing called bad luck. No, you blew it. Believe me, I've blown it. Okay. And I like to think that I adjusted once I realized, that I made, some mistakes that I didn't want to ever make again. But kids will not die if they make a mistake.
Oh, they get stronger. They develop the character, the capabilities, the chiseling away at limiting beliefs, attitudes, all of that.
We have another, particularly in the U.S., I can't speak for other countries. We have what I like to call a celebrity, non-celebrity culture. The kids are following people who have demonstrated no ability to be a leader or should be followed. They just act out. And the media promotes these people, and they have no value as leaders. And the media is also a problem because the media feeds information in sound bites to the world. And to be a good leader, you have to get below that cosmetic layer. And I see it even in my news feeds. The headlines on things are completely misleading in many cases. They use words that when I was young signaled a nuclear war. I mean, that's what they would be used for. Now they're used for anything, mind blowing, jaw dropping, uh, uh, stunning. You can go down the list. The things the media calls stunning to me are like nothing.
Well, I think once people realize that a lot of media's business model is monetizing division, they'll start seeing through the filters. And with the rise of AI and how it can do so much, um, how do you know you can believe anything that you're looking at on these feeds? Like you just don't know. So I recommend developing your own filters. So this makes sense or it doesn't. It will create value or it won't. Going through.
And another thing that I recommend for kids is, and I'm again kids 5 to 30, is become an expert in something. Could be something that's a hobby, could be something professional, it could be whatever. Because human beings, when they realize they have deep knowledge, much deeper on a particular subject or area than 99.9% of all people, it gives you a sense of power. But it also shows you the value of being an expert at something as a young person. If you're 5 years old, it might be dinosaurs. Okay, you're 5 year old. Can I tell you something? When my grandkids were 5 years old, they knew more about dinosaurs than I did. I have to admit it. And they knew it too. And I could see that they love that sense of educating grandpa, okay, on what a brontosaurus is, what a tyrannosaurus, all of these things. As you get older, okay, the topics change, but having that knowledge, I think, is very, very useful. I've always had 4 or 5 of those things going at once. And what you also find out is when you meet someone new, you have something to talk about. It's really interesting. I've had some of my best conversations on the train for 3 hours going from New York City to Washington, D.C., sitting next to strangers, starting the conversation and so on. I would say another thing I do want to mention that's very important for learning leadership is travel. It's really good if you can start traveling at a young age. I'm going to get into really young in a minute for you, just to give you an idea. But I just want to register with you that I consider travel to be the antidote to bigotry and prejudice. Because when you travel and really get into other cultures, you see that the world goes around and other people may not think like you, but they're doing just fine. And I think that is really important. The antidote to bigotry, okay, and to prejudice is travel.
Well, I think it's also an antidote to lack of appreciation.
Yeah.
I've been to probably 40 different countries building my businesses over the years, and I mean, cultures are different. People they think differently, but there's some fundamentals. Everybody wants to be healthy, fulfilled, happy, support their families. I mean, there's some standards out there.
Yes.
But wow, the majority of the world is not. What is it? 47% live in poverty of the total population. Um, I think that's a big deal too. It's crazy to me how so many Americans take for granted what they have. When I can go to India and the lowest caste in that system, find 300 million people living on less than $3 or $4 a day.
I know.
A family of 3 living on $3 or $4 a day.
So when I give speeches, often I'll say, your 5-year-old can learn leadership, and the audience is going, I can see the body language. No. What are you talking about, Peter? My 5-year-old doesn't even know what leadership means. And then I'd say one of the aspects of effective leaders is they're very comfortable choosing to or being thrown into alien environments. Now, what I mean by alien is not bad, just different. Okay. And if, if you take your 5-year-old on a vacation to a country in Europe that doesn't speak English for a week, here's what the 5-year-old is thinking, assuming it went well, which it will, uh, come back. Now I can't remember where we went, the name of it. I didn't understand anything anyone said. The food was different, but I liked it. Mom, Dad, where are we going next year? If you can't afford Europe, I understand, go to Quebec. Okay. If you can't afford Quebec, go to West Virginia. Now, you're speaking English, but your kids will see a different world. I don't mean a traumatizing experience. That's not what I'm talking about. Not at all. Not at all. But that so being exposed to alien environments. A lot of great leaders are happy to sometimes they'll just basically create their own alien environment. I have a job in New York. Well, I just got offered a great job in London. I've never been to London. I don't know anything about the UK. I'm going to London, going to an alien environment, but no fear, in fact, a sense of adventure and enjoyment. And your 5-year-old can start to learn that at a young, at that age. And so, I just, we look, we have a lot of challenges, Lee. You were right now. It is harder to be a parent than ever, I believe, right now. There's so many things. I mean, when I was a parent, life was so much easier than what parents today have to deal with. And I understand that they want to make it great for their kids, and it's hard to let your kids fail. That's another one that my speech is, that when I say that, the audience is at first going, what? No way. Interestingly, lately, the audience is like, yeah, we get that. Kind of, kind of interesting. But whether they actually do it or not, I don't know.
Well, that's, Peter, why I'm building these communities of families to leverage each other's wisdom and how to do it better. And if you think this is the best way because it feels right, once they're exposed to, let's have a more intentional path to develop kids, because they're in where our job is to develop them to be amazing adults. I want them run ready. I came from a low income home, always had food, everything's fine. Dangerous kind of environment, actually, in some ways. Parents kicked me out of the house beginning of my senior year. I was financially independent with no safety net, supporting myself at 17. And most kids today, I mean, there's high school kids that are nervous buying a cup of coffee. Yeah. So we're actually running up on time. This has been so fascinating. We need 3 or 4 hours to really do this, right? But one thing I want to touch on, we talked about before we started recording, is staying in the game and brain health. And I think I've come to a conclusion that every of all the organs in the body, the brain's the most important one, and we have to stay in the game. So I've done really well. I'm 63, soon to be 64. I feel like I'm barely getting started. I'm not even 10% of the way towards the value I think I can create. And it's keeping me young. And I think about my brain a lot, and I want clarity. I want great recall. I want creativity, presence, like all of that. So I'm wouldn't say obsessed, but I really want that to be right for quality of life. And you're staying in the game. What's your advice for our listeners from your side, and how important this is?
Well, my advice is never retire. You may change what you do. It may be less, as a leader, less stressful, but continue to be involved with other human beings. The interaction is really important, particularly as you get older. Find hobbies, find people, join discussion groups. I'm much older than you. And, but for me, I'm still got all these things going, and I'm very curious still. I guess I think I can never learn everything I want to know, So I do have that a curiosity streak. But get into stuff. Years ago, it's not so much now, but I remember so many friends, 65 years old, completely retired on the golf course, and unfortunately dropped dead. And I remember always thinking, yeah, they had nothing to do. They really had nothing to do. So plan your retirement as not as perhaps retirement from the stress of everyday life and doing some things that are a lot easier and more fun. But don't drop out. Don't drop out. Keep stimulating your brain. Work with other people. Help other people. I don't care if you volunteer to be a helper in a hospital and you used to be a CEO and now you're cleaning bedpans. I know that sounds extreme, but still, that's that's what I think is the key. Keep at it. I've had as I said, I'm married almost 55 years, and I will say also find the right partner, because I think it's probably a lot harder with no partner or with the wrong partner. I got lucky. I met my wife at my sister's wedding, believe it or not. And long story for another time, but yeah. So again, it comes to culture. We do have this very similar value systems.
Peter, if our listeners want to learn more about you, connect with you, where should they go?
So there's a number of places. The first would be petercuneo.com. You'll see the 28 essentials. You can come up on my podcast from that location. There's 2 seasons out there, 18 episodes. They're about 40 minutes each on average that you can listen to. We interview people. Some are names you might know, some are not, but when you hear their story, it's unbelievable. I have my list of things I recommend also on petercuneo.com for young people to learn leadership and so on. We have the podcast, which is available on all the usual places: iHeart, Spotify, Amazon, and YouTube. YouTube has become a very hot spot because people are now videoing their podcasts, which we did with our second season. We didn't do it with our first season. But so you can go on, you want to see us sitting there talking to each other in a studio. A lot of people apparently do. Then you could just go to Superhero Leadership with Peter Cuneo and on YouTube, and you've got it. I also continue to give speeches around the world basically on leadership, as I've been doing for 20 years. The book will be out, as I mentioned, in early February, Superhero Leadership with Peter Cuneo. I'm now starting, I'm going to call this a newsletter, but it's the wrong word, on leadership. I'm going to be putting out via video to a lot of media channels and digital channels, a 6 or 7 message from me on leadership. Every Monday, there'll be a new one. It'll start in about a month. One of the things I am doing on that is we're always looking for feedback on what we do. And one of the pieces of feedback we've gotten consistently is can you talk more about Marvel, the details of how you did it? And that's what I'm going to do on this first set of newsletters. I'm anticipating maybe 10, 6 or 7 minute episodes, but getting into the depths of how we did it and why, and culture change and all of this, a lot of the things that we talked about.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here today. One of my biggest takeaways, there's a lot of them, was your comment about being emotionally equipped for this role. And I think just even having that conversation will prepare people in a better way for the struggle or the uncomfortableness that could be in that role. So I love that. Any last thoughts for our listeners, and then we'll wrap it up?
No, I appreciate it. I want to wish all your listeners the very best for the future, and hopefully they are ones that aspire for leadership in some form. Very important. I would leave you uh, with one thing from Marvel, from a character named Spider-Man. Just remember this: with great power comes great responsibility. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. And this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today's episode, I certainly did. Please like and subscribe and leave a biggest takeaway. And until next time, show your value to the world.